Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to show you a family tree of religious organizations and movements associated with Western esotericism. Now, obviously, the first thing I need to do is explain what Western esotericism is. For the last 1600 years or so, the Western world, meaning Europe and all the places settled by Europeans, has been dominated by just one religion, Christianity. In addition to this, ever since the 18th century Enlightenment, there's also been a second major player in the West, secularism, which is based primarily on trusting what has been learned from modern science. Well, Western esotericism is basically anything that does not follow into either of these first two categories. So this would include anything related to the much older pagan religions of Europe, as well as to any new religious movements that differ significantly from Christianity. However, I should note that it does not include the standard forms of other well-established religions, such as Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. So basically, Western esotericism is a sort of grab bag for anything in the West that is considered to be a non-traditional form of spirituality. Now, up until recently, such alternatives were either prohibited or at least severely frowned upon, resulting in followers having to operate in secret, which is why the word esoteric is used. You see, esoteric means for the inner circle. In other words, it's stuff that's only meant to be understood by a very small, very select group of people. It's the opposite of exoteric, which means for the outside world or for the general public. Another word that's often used interchangeably with esotericism is the occult. The word occult simply means hidden, so you can see that both terms represent the fact that due to Christianity being so dominant in the West for so many centuries, anything else had to be kept a secret, only to be discussed in tight-knit circles. Now, before we take a look at the family tree, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, 80,000 Hours. If you work for an average of 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year for 40 years, that totals 80,000 hours. That's a lot of time, which means that your career is probably your biggest opportunity to make a positive impact in the world, which is why today's sponsor is really cool. You see, 80,000 Hours isn't trying to sell you anything. They're actually a not-for-profit, and in fact, all they want to do is give you free access to their well-researched career advice. One thing I really like about them is that they take the threat of AI very seriously. 80,000 Hours has been doing a lot of research into AI and its potential to cause major problems. In fact, they've written lots of great articles about what the future might hold and what you can do career-wise to make sure things go well. They also have a podcast, a job board, and a newsletter, which you can sign up for right now, again, for free, by using the link in the description. If you sign up today, you'll also get a free copy of their in-depth, research-led career guide sent directly to your inbox. So if you want to start planning a career that works on one of the world's most pressing problems, you should definitely check it out. Okay, back to the family tree of Western esotericism. At the top, I show 5 main streams that came together during the 1600s to jumpstart the modern interest in esotericism. The first 3 are all ideologies that competed with Christianity during the first few centuries CE, and then were basically stamped out when Christianity became dominant. The first is Gnosticism, which, depending on your viewpoint, was either a Christian heresy or simply an early form of Christianity that lost out to Nicene Christianity. Basically, it held that the physical world is altogether bad, and that therefore one should seek to gain knowledge about the hidden, spiritual world instead, which is altogether good. Neo-Platonism was, in a way, a reaction to Gnosticism, founded by the 3rd century Greek philosopher Plotinus. He held that the physical world was in fact good, but was simply existing in the darkness. The goal, therefore, was to move towards the light, which emanates from the One, the source of all being. Hermeticism held similar views about the One, but focused more on practical ways to understand and use the spiritual world through things like alchemy, astrology, and magic. The name comes from a legendary figure called Hermes Trismegistus, who is associated with both Hermes from Greek mythology and Thoth from Egyptian mythology. He supposedly wrote several texts which passed down certain knowledge that had been given to humans in the very deep past. In contrast to the first three streams, Kabbalah developed during the Middle Ages. It's a form of Jewish mysticism, but actually shares much in common with the first three streams in that it distinguishes between an unknowable one true God and the knowable emanations that have been revealed by God. Finally, there's a fifth stream, which represents all of the various ideas taken from Eastern religions, which had been known in the West to some extent during ancient times, but were then basically ignored until the Age of Exploration, which brought Westerners in touch with them again. Now, obviously, I could say much more about each of these five streams, but that was just a very quick overview. Okay, so during the 1500s, all of these older ideas started to resurface in Germany due to the Renaissance, which involved an interest in classical antiquity, combined with the Reformation, which involved the decline of church authority. Eventually, things coalesced in the early 1600s with a movement called Rosicrucianism, which began when three mysterious documents suddenly appeared and started to be shared around. They introduce a man called Christian Rosenkreuz, which means Rose Cross, who traveled the world learning ancient universal truths from many different sources, and who then created a secret society called the Fraternity of the Rose Cross, which practiced things like alchemy. Now, whether these documents were meant to be taken as allegories or were simply created as hoaxes, we don't really know. But in a time when Western science was in its infancy and held a lot of promise, many people grabbed hold of the ideas in them and started to explore them further. Around the same time over in England and Scotland, the foundations of modern Freemasonry were being laid. Originally a network of local guilds for actual stonemasons, eventually the guilds started allowing wealthy individuals to join. And over time, things went from being centered on overseeing the construction trade to being more of a social club for elites that had a complex organizational structure and held all sorts of secrets. This proved useful for those interested in Rosicrucianism because it provided a model for creating Rosicrucian secret societies, the first of which was the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross, founded in Germany in the 1750s. Take note that in order to be a member of the order, one also had to be a master mason. Now, if there's one thing that I can say with confidence about the Rosicrucians, is that they made some really cool charts. I'm not going to attempt to explain any of them because I'm not sure that I could. But basically, they combine ideas taken from stuff like Hermeticism and Kabbalah in an attempt to explain the world in a way that at least looks orderly and scientific, while at the same time retaining certain elements from Christian theology. Probably the most well-known member of the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross was King Frederick II of Prussia, who was the successor to Frederick the Great. However, following his death, the order eventually fizzled out. A bit later, though, in 1865, a similar organization was established in the UK called the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, or SRIA for short. It actually still exists to this day. But perhaps more well-known is the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which copied the structure of the Societas Rosicruciana, but made two very important changes. First, it allowed women to join. And second, it modeled itself on ancient paganism, instead of maintaining ties to Christianity. Members of the order included William Butler Yeats and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, as well as A.E. Waite and Pixie Smith, those last two being the creators of the popular Rider-Waite tarot deck. However, the most important thing about the Order of the Golden Dawn is that it introduced certain rituals and ceremonies that supposedly involved powerful magic. These rituals would go on to be used by other esoteric groups that I'll talk about later on. Another secret society that modeled itself on Freemasonry and which had connections to Rosicrucianism was the Ellis Cohens, meaning the elect priests. their full name being the Order of Knight Masons, Elect Priests of the Universe. This organization later inspired a Frenchman who went by the name Papus and who founded the Martinist Order, which, despite its logo having a Star of David, was not Jewish. Now, before I move on away from Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry, I should mention the influence that Freemasonry had on Mormonism. LDS founder Joseph Smith, as well as the next 3 LDS presidents, are all known to have been Freemasons, and there are definitely some similarities between certain LDS rituals and symbols and the rituals and symbols used within Freemasonry. So, while the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is not generally considered to be a part of Western esotericism, it does have some esoteric elements. Okay, I now want to move over to another early movement within modern Western esotericism, Swedenborgianism, named after the Swedish polymath Emanuel Swedenborg. Among other things, Swedenborg promoted the idea that some humans remain on Earth after death, either as angels or demons, and that such spirits can influence the living. While not an official Christian doctrine, the idea that dead loved ones can live on as ghosts or angels is definitely a common folk belief held by many Christians today. It was certainly a belief held by Joseph Smith, who claimed to have been visited by the angel Moroni, who had previously lived on Earth as a human. Anyway, Swedenborg did not establish a church during his lifetime, but after his death, some of his followers did, and it became known as the New Church. Overlapping with the lifespan of Emanuel Swedenborg was that of a German physician named Franz Mesmer, whose name became the basis for the word mesmerized. He taught the idea that there exists an invisible force that connects all things, and that this force can be manipulated in order to promote healing. In fact, he developed certain techniques to do so. But here's where things get interesting. Eventually, Swedenborg's ideas and Mesmer's ideas were combined to form the idea that certain techniques can be used to manipulate and communicate with the invisible spirits of dead relatives. Thus, the movement known as Spiritualism was born, with the 3 Fox sisters becoming some of the very first mediums, although they were later revealed to be frauds. Spiritualism was all the rage during the late 1800s and early 1900s, but eventually it lost its popularity as science improved. Nevertheless, there are still some spiritualist churches in the U.S. that still exist to this day, and these are now united under the National Spiritualist Association. And in Latin America, a certain branch of spiritualism called Spiritism, founded by Allan Kardec, remains extremely popular. Its largest organization, the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, has almost 4 million members. Another esoteric movement that can be traced to Franz Mesmer is New Thought, although its founder was actually a follower of Mesmer named Phineas Quimby. The main idea behind New Thought is that one's mental state can have an impact on the physical world. So if you've ever been told to think positively, or that you can manifest good things into your life, you can thank Phineas Quimby for that. There are several New Thought organizations that still exist today, including the Unity Church, as well as several groups that use the religious science label. Also connected to the New Thought movement, even though they don't acknowledge it, is Christian Science, officially the Church of Christ Scientist. Their founder, Mary Baker Eddy, happened to be a student of Phineas Quimby, and she incorporated many of his ideas into her own movement. So, as you can see from the chart, it was during the 1800s that Western esotericism really took off and went in a bunch of different directions. Well, of the many esoteric figures who were active during this period, perhaps the most important was a Russian-born woman known as Helena Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society. Her system of thought, known as Theosophy, meaning God wisdom, combined for the first time all the ideas that the Rosicrucians had been exploring with the ideas and practices coming out of the spiritualism movement. So, like other occultists, she believed that there had once been, in the very deep past, a sort of universal human religion that had eventually been lost. even though hints of it could be seen in every religion. However, she also believed that there were certain masters who lived throughout history who knew about this original truth and with whom she communicated. Her goal was thus to reestablish a universal religion with the help of these masters, some of whom were still alive and living in Tibet. Take note that the logo for the Theosophical Society combines many ancient religious symbols, including a snake eating its tail, which is associated with alchemy, but also a Star of David, an Egyptian Ankh, a Hindu Om, and even a swastika, which, before its association with Nazism, had been used for centuries by Buddhism and other religions. However, there is in fact a real link between Theosophy and the racist ideas promoted by the Nazis. One of Blavatsky's ideas involved what she called root races, which were connected to lost continents like Atlantis and Lemuria. She taught that the so-called Aryan race was currently the most advanced one, an idea which led to a movement called Ariosophy, meaning wisdom of the Aryans. This, combined with the Volkisch movement, which was an early neo-pagan movement that sought to connect Germany back to its original roots, led to the formation of various occult groups, such as the Thule Society, from whom the Nazis got the idea to use the swastika as their main symbol. Now keep in mind that the overall influence that the occult had on Nazism is often overstated, in an effort to make the Nazis seem even more evil and sinister than they were, as if that was necessary. In reality, while there was likely some influence, the Nazis were far more concerned with their political agenda than they were with spiritual matters. Theosophy also had a direct influence on anthroposophy, which was founded by Rudolf Steiner, and which you might know about through its network of Waldorf schools. It attempts to combine spirituality with the scientific method and places a big emphasis on free will. Now, if the most important esotericist of the late 1800s was Helena Blavatsky, then the most important esotericist of the early 1900s was undoubtedly Aleister Crowley. He was originally a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but then went on to develop his own system of thought, known as Thelema, which is a Greek word meaning divine will. It all started during his honeymoon in Egypt in 1909, when a spirit supposedly dictated to him a text called the Book of the Law. By this point, the Order of the Golden Dawn had fallen apart, and Crowley had started his own organization called AA. It was therefore through AA and also through another organization he joined called OTO that he introduced Thelema. Like other esoteric ideologies, Thelema combines ideas from a bunch of different sources. However, it stands out in that it puts more of a focus on ceremonial magic, which it calls magic with a CK, in order to distinguish it from illusionist magic. These ceremonies included lots of weird stuff, including sexual stuff. And this, combined with Crowley's general libertine lifestyle, made him an extremely controversial figure. But regardless of what one thinks of Aleister Crowley, there's no doubt that his influence on esotericism continues to this day. For example, near the end of his life, he became friends with Gerald Gardner, who helped develop what is now known as Wicca. Crowley's writings also influenced Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan, and even L. Ron Hubbard, who invented Scientology. Although, as I mentioned in my video about atheist denominations, it's important to know that the Church of Satan doesn't actually believe in a real Satan. Now, speaking of Wicca, let me now say a few things about neo-paganism. The word pagan comes from the Latin word for rural, and was used during the rise of Christianity to describe those who followed the older polytheistic religions instead. These religions eventually all went extinct, being stamped out by Christianity, which is why pagans today are referred to as neo-pagans. Now, there are basically two main types of neo-paganism. First, there are the Reconstructionist groups, which try to literally bring back or reconstruct particular pagan religions, exactly as they would have been followed in ancient times. So, for example, Hellenism is an attempt to bring back the worship of Greek gods, whereas heathenry is an attempt to bring back the worship of German gods. In contrast, eclectic neo-paganism is more of a mishmash, in which general pagan ideas and practices are promoted without necessarily focusing on just one type. So one example would be Druidry, which promotes harmony and worship of nature gods in general, and is far less exact in its aims, unlike Celtic Reconstructionism, which is. However, of all the types of eclectic neo-paganism, Wicca is by far the most popular and most well-known. Originating in the UK, it is strongly associated with the concept of witches. After all, the word Wicca is simply the Old English word for sorcerer. But unlike other types of esotericism, Wicca has no central structure or organization. Most practitioners simply practice on their own, incorporating Wiccan customs into their life as they see fit. Now, I should point out that while Wicca tends to attract slightly more women than men, there are in fact male Wiccans, and the word witch can be used for a male. Some Wiccans do put a stronger emphasis on the Divine Mother, and hence there is some overlap with another group called the Goddess movement. Alright, now the last thing I need to do is explain how the New Age movement fits into all of this. Nowadays, a lot of the things we've been discussing simply end up being labeled as New Age. That's because New Age did in fact end up incorporating a bunch of different esoteric movements under one big umbrella. So for example, it draws from neo-paganism, Theosophy, Spiritualism, and New Thought. However, it also borrows elements from one of the newest types of esotericism, UFO religions. These started springing up in the 1950s, following the famous Roswell incident. The best-known UFO religion is probably Raolism, led by a Frenchman that goes by the name Raoul. According to Raolism, all of humanity's stories about God or the gods are actually based on memories of an advanced species of aliens that visited Earth in the distant past, which it calls the Elohim. They also teach that the Elohim continue to visit Earth, and that they communicate with the group's leader, Raoul. Now, when it comes to New Age, things are not as specific as that. After all, there is no central leadership or any structure at all to the New Age movement. So different people who practice New Age often believe different things, or at least focus on different things. So while not all New Agers believe in aliens, it's not uncommon for New Agers to believe in some sort of helpers, whether they be divine spirits, dead relatives, or extraterrestrials. The term New Age itself has a direct connection to outer space. You see, every 2,000 years or so, the spring equinox moves from one zodiac constellation to another. We've been in the age of Pisces since around the time of Jesus, but we'll soon be entering the age of Aquarius. Although the precise moment when this will occur is impossible to know for sure. So the idea is that humanity will enter a new phase of spiritual awakening whenever this happens, and that already certain people, those who are particularly sensitive, spiritually speaking, are already at the higher level. Okay, so that was just a very brief look at how all the various movements within Western esotericism are related. Like all of the episodes in these denomination-type videos, a lot more could obviously be said about each group, but the goal here was to simply give you the lay of the land. If you want to explore any of these topics further, I suggest that you check out channels such as Esoterica and Angela's Symposium, which I'll link to in the description. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter from 80,000 Hours. Thanks for watching.